We are on air. So good evening. Well, where am I? Good evening, Europe. Good morning, West Coast, and good afternoon, East Coast. So this is the last session. It has been almost 15 hours live discussion about seaweed. And to close, this first edition of Seaweed Around the Clock, and I'm going to ask you to put your mic on mute when you're not speaking. To close this 16 hours discussion, we're going to have a last session on what will be the best business model for seaweed industry. And as you see, we have lots of people, men, talking about seaweed. So I wanted to bring a new young generation leader from San Diego to talk about her vision. She's growing seaweed in San Diego. And Leslie, I will ask you to introduce yourself, and you have up to 10 minutes to tell us what is your vision. So I'm going to stay offline, Warren, and the floor is yours, and I come back, when the minister is there.
Welcome, Leslie.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Warren, and thanks, Pierre, for the introduction. Hi, everybody. Thank you for staying on at the tail end of this amazing idea that Pierre brought to life. And I'm really excited to be here. So thanks for inserting a little bit of my perspective into this this panel. I'm excited to hear about all the folks on this panel and what everyone's up to. But I'll give a brief few minutes on who I am, how I got interested in seaweed, and what we're doing now as a company. So I started Sunken Seaweed, which is a seaweed farming company with my partner, who's now my fiance. We started in 2017. But to kind of go right before that, I met my partner in college. We were both studying marine science, and we were surveying the rocky intertidal and kelp forests in about 2015 in Northern California. And during that time, due to kind of a culmination of anthropogenic climate change and other ecosystem problems, there was a 98% die-off of kelp forest in the very area that we were surveying. So it was kind of this terrifying wake-up call of what we as new budding marine biologists were up against. And I decided that we needed to have a career helping bolster these kelp forest communities that we love and that were obviously in peril. So we moved down to San Diego, which was kind of our home base. We looked for resources on how to start a seaweed farm in California. And at the time, there were next to no existing kelp farms. And so we were really strapped for resources. But thankfully, the Port of San Diego, the Unified Port of San Diego, had just started a blue incubator program to which they wanted to facilitate sustainable aquaculture as well as blue tech. So Tori and I, with zero business background, we kind of tried our hardest to make these revenue projections, profit and loss, and pitch this idea of a sustainable kelp farm in San Diego Bay to the port. And after some back and forth, they facilitated our project and partnered with us. And so since 2018, we've had a farm in the San Diego Bay. But what the purpose of this talk is really is a mission in seaweed farming. And for us, the mission that we always had from the start was to better the ecosystems that we were growing seaweed in. And because of that, it has allowed our young startup company to be pretty nimble and kind of dynamic with all of the hurdles that we've run into with seaweed in the last 5 years. And there've been a lot. So San Diego Bay is super dynamic, marine ecosystem, right? We've got hundreds of thousands of users. We have lots of marine pollution to deal with. So while we set out as a company to grow seaweed, to follow this model of growing kelp, harvesting it, and putting it into the supply chain as food, a food product, we quickly found through our pilot studies that was not enough. And so we kind of had to change our trajectory. And because of that, we really leaned into this idea of ecosystem services and what seaweeds, kelp and other seaweeds can do for the environment that they're grown in. And that has been a whirlwind experience. We've kind of taken that concept and run with it. And now we are farming seaweed in the San Diego Bay for the purpose of removing excess nutrients from the waterway, as well as looking into using it to remove copper, PCBs, some of the more nasty contaminants too. So, you know, in California, we have this huge, we're on the precipice of a lot of kelp farms, seaweed farms expanding, but because of our dynamic system, we really kind of have to meet that and diversify what it means to be a seaweed farmer in this state and at this time. So it's a really great experience, but we've partnered with universities. I'm in a marine laboratory run by San Diego State University right now. We at Sunken Seaweed are industrial partners to this university. And part of that is we partner with them, and we have undergraduates, grad students, high schoolers researching how to improve seaweed farming in California, and how to further aquaculture through a lens of ecology. So it's really exciting, and there's lots of work to be done, but you know, having the perspective that we need to kind of change the economic model that we have traditionally used with aquaculture in order to accommodate the 21st century and all of the issues that come with it is kind of our biggest impetus for at Sunken Seaweed. So I think that's all I need to say. I have to say really on that, and I do want to leave plenty of time for to meet all our other panelists. So thanks everybody, appreciate it.
That's outstanding, Leslie. Thank you so much for doing the introduction.
Warren, just a quick reminder, you know, go on mute if you're not speaking. There is an echo.
Okay, thank you. Well, since I'm speaking now, I will remain off mute, I should say. Thank you again, Leslie. You know, what you talk about is super exciting. This industry is amazing. It holds so much promise, and there's so many interesting people involved in this industry. We've seen it for the last 24 hours. So, you know, myself, I'll tell you what I'd like to do is I'd like each of the panelists that haven't spoken yet to give a quick 2-minute introduction. And I'm a 25-year venture capitalist. I spent most of my career in renewables, but I've done just about everything. Close to this industry for just over a year, thanks to one of the panelists here who introduced me, Michael. I quickly did a lot of research, got involved, and now I'm completely immersed in this industry. I love everything about it. It holds more promise and excitement than just about every industry that I've ever been a part of. And so super proud to be here, and really anxious to hear some of the viewpoints that we're about to hear today. So why don't we start off? We've got 3 other panelists here. We've got, of course, Michael Williamson. He's a fellow president of Cascadia Seaweed. Markos Scheer, he's the CEO of Seagrove Kelp from Alaska. And Mitchell Lench is the CEO of Oceans Balance from Maine, where he's not in Maine. He's currently on holiday in the Keys, lucky guy. So Michael, why don't we start with you and give us a quick 2 minutes on you and Cascadia.
All right. Thanks, Warren, and thanks, Leslie, for the introduction. So Mike Williamson, president of Cascadia Seaweed. Quick background, 40 years in marine industries at the NGO, government, university, and for-profit. My business partner, one of them, and I discovered seaweed in the fall of 2018 and incorporated in 2019. We're located on the west coast of Canada, so we have tens of thousands of kilometers of shoreline, pristine waters in which to grow. It's interesting, when we started the company, we said, we're going to grow seaweed. And kind of like Leslie, the business model wasn't fully fleshed out. Now, of course, it's plant-based food, it's bovine methane emission, carbon capture, and ocean improvement. We are triple bottom line for us, that's people, planet, and prosperity. And we focus all of our attention on shareholders as a for-profit company, stakeholders, mainly Mother Earth, and rights and title holders, which in British Columbia is First Nations and Indigenous communities. So we always do a balance amongst those three. I've interfaced with most of the panelists here. Our business, as with most, is very, very collaborative. We're all in this together. We've got to grow a heck of a lot more seaweed, meet what the World Bank said, and that's in the next 25 years, 10% of the global food mass could come from seaweed. So we're very proud to be part of this sector. And as Warren said, we look forward to the dialogue that will ensue over the next hour.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. And how about Markos? 2 minutes from you.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you so much for letting me be part of this. Exciting to meet all of you. Mike and I knew each other, but all of the rest of you are new. And I run a mariculture, really it's a mariculture development company, and with the ultimate goal of doing multi-species mariculture in Southeast Alaska. We currently have about a 100-acre, which is 50 hectare or so multi-species seaweed operation in Southeast Alaska. We are vertically integrated. We were recently approved for another 50-hectare site or 60-hectare site or so. So we're looking to expand into other species and other areas. It is I've had a career of 35 years in the seafood industry in one way or another, and so this was part of what brought me into this. As I'm from Southeast Alaska, and we wanted to help move forward this idea of sustainable economic development in a region which certainly needs some additional opportunities, and so that so we started this operation in 2016. We've been producing seaweed for 2 years now, and we're going into our third seed production year in August, and we're very excited about it. We work closely with the local communities and local individuals, and we see a very bright future in sustainable and renewable seaweed production.
That's great, Markos. Thank you so much. Next, we have Mitchell Lench from Oceans Balance. Mitchell.
Okay. Thank you, Warren. And I also want to thank BioMarine putting on this pretty impressive conference, global conference, which is, I think, really interesting just to get different perspectives from around the world, learn from one another. Just a brief background on Oceans Balance. We formed in 2016. I co-founded the business with an individual who had started the first commercial seaweed farms in the U.S. So kind of came from an aquaculture background, and we're vertically integrated seaweed business. We're growing seaweed. We work with third-party farmers, a lot of lobster men and women in Maine who have farms. We also process into 3 different formats, and then we create value-added products after that. One of our product lines is innovative food retail brand of food products, which are sold in stores, retail stores like Whole Foods, etc. We also have a e-commerce presence, and we're also doing more now in the bulk ingredient market, in the pet animal health. And we're just launching a nutraceutical line at the moment. Just a moment, maybe a second on the Maine angle, because that's partly, why we're involved in seaweed, is because Maine has been very active in the United States as far as being an epicenter of the seaweed industry. There's about 30 to 40 farms currently, about 200 leases, and part of why Maine works very well is we have about 3,500 miles of coastline with a very low density population. It's about 1.3 million people, and stays pretty stable. And we also have a lot of lobstermen and lobster women who are looking for alternative sources of income during a time where there's a lot of uncertainty about what holds the future for the lobstering industry. The other point is Maine is close to the corridor between Washington, D.C. and Boston, which is the most densely populated part of the U.S. It's about 50 million people just in that corridor, which is short driving distance. And the other thing I want to mention is we do farming as well as we have a team of wild harvesters we work with on species that we're not able to farm yet, but we're working on different ways to get more involved in dulse and some of the other value-added species that are not yet there on the farming side. Thank you.
Awesome. Mitchell, thank you so much for that. And thank you everyone for those introductions. That's great. It sounds like everyone's taking a slightly different approach, but it's going to be really interesting to talk this through. I've got some questions here that we can start with. And the first one I'd like to start for each of you, what are the criteria to build a sustainable and profitable business model around seaweed? And the second part of that question is, based on that, do you think there's a place for small producers in the future, in North America at least? Any one of you can start. Michael, do you want to start there?
Sure, Warren, thanks very much. For us as a business, of course, profit is important. You need to have revenue coming in. You need to be able to bank some of that revenue in order to grow. But the other two P's, as I mentioned earlier, people and planet, are important as well. The second thing that's essential to us is scalability. We're going to have to, as an industry, get large and be recognized as an industry, have one voice when we're dealing with constituents in the government. So scalability is important. If we were just a small seaweed farmer in a sea of small seaweed farmers, that wouldn't help drive the industry. And the last one is quality. Standards in North America are all over the map. How much is acceptable to be in seaweed, both as human food, pet food, animal feed? So we have to work together. So my three are profit, with the other two P's, scalability, and an established quality criteria for the North American market.
Great, Michael. Thank you for that. Markos, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One is that, having a clearly defined business plan about where you want to be and how you're going to get there, and having, one of the biggest challenges of, I think, any of these emerging industries is in really, I don't see that in any of the areas where this development is occurring, whether it be Maine or BC or Alaska, are there sufficient infrastructures in place? So we need capital to build those infrastructures in each of these places. We built a nursery because we had to. There wasn't one existing. And so one of the challenges that farmers of any size are going to have is sourcing seed and raw material. I absolutely think that there is a place in this burgeoning industry for all sizes of operations. I think that what you'll find is probably what we've seen more in Maine and the East Coast, where you have aggregators that will assemble that material and make it into something else. But there is also, and definitely, a place for those folks that want to grow and create a value-added product and take that directly to the market. And I think that's really important. It needs all pieces. Nevertheless, I do think that that industry has to work together. And Mike's comment about consistent quality standards across the industry is really important, and it's something in a variety of different ways. And consistency in processing and techniques and structures and HACCP plans and a whole variety of different things. One of the things that I felt like Alaska had to offer that others didn't is, like Maine, Alaska's got 35,000 miles of coastline and 680,000 people. and 5,000 fishing vessels, and there's an underutilized seafood processing facility in almost every coastal city. So, and existing transportation networks and a variety of different things. The challenge of Alaska is that unlike what Mitch has, is Alaska, most of Alaska is a long way from anywhere. So transportation is a challenge. Power and labor are challenges, but it is also one of the most diverse seaweed populations on the planet. So, there are lots of things that are real positives about developing in Alaska, and there are some things that are hurdles that challenge us. And to do that effectively in Alaska, we're going to individually and collectively need to build the infrastructure to support the whole industry. And there's a point at which there's a nexus. We're not there yet, but I'm hoping that by others in the state are doing, agriculture development is a very vigorous thing. We've had, the site lease applications. There's several thousand acres that are currently in process or granted. So, the scalability component is definitely there. Our primary challenge is getting enough capital for enough time to fully develop each of those, whether it be shellfish or seaweed propagation enterprises of any size.
That's great, Markos. Yeah, capital is going to play a big role in this, as we know. So we'll get to that question in a second. But for the last two, Leslie, you've just started the industry, and I'd love to hear your perspective and where you see this going in terms of developing a sustainable yet a profitable business as well.
Certainly, thanks. And so California has a pretty stark juxtaposition to both Maine and Alaska in terms of rugosity of coastline. We really have a very exposed coastline. We have kind of minimal inlets and bays and things like that. We also have this super rich history of conservation, along California's coastline. We have marine protected areas, things like that kind of lend to more challenges in expansion, at least along the immediate coast of California. But what we do see is folks going further out in the EEZ, few miles off the coast, and working on these large scale farms kind of immediately. Where I see the most promise in terms of kind of starting small and things like that, which is kind of our ethos at our companies, is starting small with seaweed farms, are on land actually. So we started one of our first commercial farms, partnering with a fish hatchery and kind of using some existing space, some intake pipes, things like that, plumbing that already exists. And so we have a really, really small, commercial sized kelp seaweed farming facility there. I think those kinds of partnerships are going to be kind of crucial to getting things started while we work on this huge lethargic permitting situation that we have in California. But that's kind of where I'm hopeful with it, and then finding those few bays in California that are amenable to cultivating food. They're out there, but yeah, I think something that was surprising for us was how much interest and how much momentum carbon offsetting, carbon insetting, and then nutrient credits are. So that is going to be huge, but of course there's so much research that needs to partner with it.
Yeah, you've hit on a bunch of points there that are pretty cool. Carbon, of course, and scalability are two of them. Now, I'd love to hear from Mitchell on this too. I mean, you're the old guy in the panel when it comes to how long you've been in business, and you've diversified. So, in terms of your business model, what were the criteria to get out of the gates and build that model?
So, yeah, I mean, part of the challenge, I think, in seaweed is how many opportunities there are, how many verticals you can end up going into. One of our focus was we wanted to hit some singles and doubles, apologize for the baseball metaphor, before we went for the big thing. We wanted cash flow, and one of the things is we bootstrapped for several years. Up until very recently, we took no external capital. We just took our first external capital round just about a month ago, which changes kind of our trajectory now. But we wanted to make sure we had cash flow, and also that we would start looking at evaluating some of the sectors that we thought were most interesting, that weren't as capital intensive to begin with. And now we're looking at some of the sectors that are, have more capital required, maybe more refining process to it. And that's, I think, kind of one of the keys for us is we didn't want to take in a ton of capital before we knew where we wanted to go. And now we do.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, guys. I have a couple questions that were before this one, but I think that, in any industry, early stage financing, this industry holds so much promise. But I'm wondering, many of the investors are not quite up to snuff on the seaweed industry. There's many that I talk to that are fellow venture capitalists that really have no idea about this industry. And I'm wondering, how are you convincing them, and how did you convince them to? I know some of you may not have taken in money yet, but for those that have from third parties, whether they're private equity or venture capitalists or just pure high net worth investors, how are you convincing them to come on board, and how did that play out? You want to start, Markos?
Yeah, I can take it. It's still recent memory for me. So I started the concept in 2015 and filed for the first site lease in 2017. Started the company in 2016, but it took several years. All of the first round funding that contributed to this was private equity. For me, I had been involved in mariculture development in Alaska for some years, and there's a pretty active promotion to develop mariculture as an economic development tool in Alaska, and I've been heavily involved in that for a good deal of time. There's a state-sponsored task force that produced reports that provided credibility and support for the concept. The local communities were quite actively in support of it. So they'll kind of set the context for that conversation. And part of it is, I had spent 20 years prior to that practicing law in the seafood and maritime industry on the coast, and including a fair amount of time working with the California Coastal Commission. I feel for you and trying to do this in California, because I am certain that what I'm doing up here, I couldn't get permitted anywhere else in the country. It just spatially challenged. The island that we are on has 1,000 miles of coastline, just one island, and has 5,000 people. So it's an opportunity for expansion, and so all of those things provided some context and credibility to the discussion. But I can also tell you that it took me 2 years to assemble the investment that we took to get this started, and it was a couple $1 million. My file of NDAs was at least an inch thick. So it is you got to get used to hearing no, and it took a lot of time and a lot of work talking to lots of different groups, all of which would come into this and say, it's a great idea, I love it. And once you are post-revenue, come back and talk to me. And that was a consistent message. And I think the availability of long-term capital is the single greatest hurdle for seaweed industry development, whether in the US, Canada, or anywhere, is having committed capital for a long period of time. One thing that we've realized is it takes twice as long and it costs twice as much than you think it does, and your yield's going to be half of what you expect until you really get it figured out. And those are the challenges that we've faced, and I am certain that anyone coming along is going to be able to express the same the same reality.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect anything else. I mean, like you said, every industry faces those challenges, but you know, I'm out there on a regular basis talking to different investors. I have hope. So there seems to be a lot more interest. I mean, if you are able to make this industry analogous to the plant-based industry, there's a ton of capital out there for that. This industry has everything. It has CO2 reduction. I mean, we're not using fresh water or land. We're creating food. We're creating byproducts for bioplastics. I mean, this is a save the world industry if I've ever seen it before. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to, you know, attract a lot more capital, and hopefully I'll be able to play a role in that as well. And what about you, Mike?
Thanks, Warren. Yeah, hope underpinned it in the start. We started our capital raise in 2019, and we did 500,000 friends and family. And since then have raised a fair bit more, mainly through more institutional. So hope was the initial driver. And in fact, you know, the term blue economy really wasn't even in vogue when we started in 2019. It's been on the books since around 2013, but you couldn't find any press on it. So now it's all about the blue economy, and folks are realizing you can extract value from the sea. Three more pertinent factors for us. One is climate change. Again, that's a big driver now. We've been talking about it forever. Now I think folks finally get it. You touched on the plant-based foods, and plant-based food as an analog for our industry has made a big difference. And then the carbon and methane. Leslie talked about it. On any given day, I can't tell you whether it's climate change specifically, plant-based food, carbon and methane, bovine. And every investor, this is one of the challenges for us, every investor looks at it a different way. And if you're going to a food giant for an investment, he goes, I don't care about cow feed. Go to a big ag firm and they go, I don't care about seaweed jerky and kelp burgers. So that's a challenge for us. And it's probably representative of the fact that it's an immature industry, and we have to continue to work at getting the message out.
Thank you, Michael. You know, just as you say that, I'm thinking, you know, maybe more funders like myself. You know, that's something I'm going to take a hard look at too, because this industry deserves capital, if any industry does, and so yeah, that's an interesting aspect. Leslie, what about you? And you're in a different jurisdiction, hard to grow, regulatory. Are you facing any, you know, pushback from investors in that regard?
Definitely. I mean, the uncertainty of how our farms could expand is there. You know, that we're just no one is at a stage where it's like convincing enough to most like larger dollar investors. But that hasn't really been an issue for us. You know, we did our MBA like business training through a Next Economy firm, and so we really learned about when it's okay and when you want to take those big steps with venture capital and with seaweed farming. It is just such a, you know, does not have the traditional return on investments that you might be pressured to bring forward with those traditional capital investments. And so, you know, what we've really benefited from is, yeah, initially friends and family investments, convincing folks that this crazy idea could work, but also leaning into the resources at the Port of San Diego and their kind of finance, their long-term goals are to make it so that they can have food aquaculture in San Diego Bay. And they realize that's maybe 3 or 4 decades off, but they're investing in companies like ours now so that they can secure that future. Yeah, so we've stayed away from most traditional capital investments that in that way and relied more on grant funding, friends and family, while we're still small. But
okay, thank you, Leslie. Mitchell, how about you?
Yeah, so I think something is turning in the market a little bit because in recent months we got approached by 2 investors who were evaluating the market and came to us. We were just starting to get our materials together, said, okay, we need to kind of, you know, go out and do that raise. And I was like dreading the amount of work that was going to be involved. And then this one investor in particular who is very knowledgeable on the sector. As Mike was talking about, all of the plant-based protein, carbon sequestration issues really hit a chord, and I think that's starting to change, because it really does fit very well in terms of like that, especially for someone who cares about impact in their investments, and also has a vision, who can see what's going on maybe in other parts of the world, or what is the potential. You have to dig a little deeper. I'm sure there's a lot of education, I think, if you're going to go out to do a very large raise, that you need to do. But there's a lot of positive signs, I think, on the horizon for the industry.
I just mute myself. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. I think so too. And I'm a vegan, so it's easy for me to understand the plant-based economy and the correlation between seaweed and the sustainability issues around it. Well, hopefully the rest of the world tunes into that. One of the issues that's going to be there for investors and for them to understand is concessions. So maybe we can talk about that. Question is, getting concessions is an important step in securing future business. When demand for seaweed increases, what are some of the risks or challenges for getting these concessions, and how might that play out for the seaweed industry? We'll start, Markos.
Thank you. I think that's a really good question, and I think that from my perspective, one of the and Mike is exactly right. Each investor has different, whether it be a triple bottom line, whether it be saving the world, whether it be looking for something. Most of the folks that invested in this enterprise are looking at the opportunity. And one of the things that Alaska presents with all of this existing infrastructure and water without very many people, it represents scalability. And I think that's, and that's where the opportunity is. Like I said, we've got a couple of, we call them site leases, but you would call them concessions, where you can do this activity. And so we've got 100 hectares now, and another 300 they're in process. It is very much where really understanding the regulatory framework where you're going to do this prospective development, and that development's got to be consistent with what is possible. I don't think it's possible to put a 1,000-acre farm in state waters in most places in North America, but you could do smaller farms and size appropriate for what your business plan is. I do think that the developing the community relationship with it is a really important part, because all of these sites, whether they're at least in North America, are going to be it's public waterway, and it's going to require a lot of folks to either not object or to support it individually. So getting public perception and getting that license is a really, really important part of the process, and maybe more important than the business plan itself.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Mike, you and I have talked about this offline. I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
Sure. And I wrote down Leslie's words: huge lethargic permitting process. And we actually have that challenge in British Columbia. We're an aquaculture-based economy. We do $1.3 billion a year of finfish, shellfish, and now seaweed in BC. Unfortunately, all the rules look like the same, whether you're putting in a finfish farm or a simple seaweed farm. So for us, it's working with the regulators, creating new processes, helping them. But probably one of the single greatest risks to us is not capital. It's the government process is very, very slow. And we have to highlight to them that they have to get up to speed. The industry is moving fast. For the foreshore residents that Markos spoke about, we are fortunate to work with First Nations and Indigenous communities. There's a different, more respectful rule set to working with them, but they instantly see the value of seaweed cultivation to the planet, to improving the water, and also to providing economic opportunities so they can stay at home and have jobs, just like the lobster fishermen, for example. So that provides us a bit of wind in our sails, but by far the greatest challenge is huge lethargic permitting processes, which is why we're going to start putting in applications for some of those 1,000-hectare farms, because it's as much work for a 10-hectare farm as it is for a 1,000-hectare farm. We have the coastline, we're going to go after it.
It's awesome news. Now, of course, the technology is coming out of this space too, and we all have to consider that. And all of a sudden, the demand side of the equation is going to play a huge role in our ability. So the scalability is going to be key in terms of concessions. So, Leslie, you've already talked about the regulatory process there. Maybe a better part to that question for you is how do you think you could make recommendations to any of the potential regulators and or politicians that might be listening today?
Yeah, and this was a huge learning dialogue for me in the last couple minutes. So thank you for your input there. Much to learn. We have been in these rooms with these regulators, and they concede to us that they are understaffed and not, at least in California, they're not really up to what's coming with this new kind of forms of aquaculture. The fact that water bottom lease hasn't been granted like since I've been alive in California is super telling, and it stings a little extra when young people come in and we say, where's the accessibility for us? We're trying to promote aquaculture, to join this industry. We're all here, we're all waiting. So we've been in contact with those regulatory agencies, and they, wholly admit that they're woefully behind there. But they're aware of the opportunity, at least in California, thanks to largely a ton of grant-funded research that's been going on in the last decade here, which all points to at least some ability to scale up in California in different ways. So they're ongoing conversations, and they're not always fun to have, but they're really largely super receptive group of people.
Thank you for that. Mitchell, your perspective on this?
On the regulatory side, so Maine has definitely been pretty progressive on the regulatory side. The DMR, the Division of Marine Resources, has a lot of knowledgeable people in aquaculture because it's been part of our ocean management for quite a while. What we're going through right now is just the sheer number of leases that have been sent in, and just the lack of resources to process them. So that's one of the issues we're trying to work on, is make sure they're fully resourced. We have the support of Senator Collins, Senator King, congressmen, state legislators as well. So there's a lot of support. And the other thing that has been very helpful up to now is that the lobster community, who has a huge voice in what goes on the water, most of them have been fairly supportive because they see this as an opportunity. There are some people who are just like, well, this is going a little too fast, and we just had to defeat some legislation that was trying to put the brakes on all types of aquaculture just because they saw too many leases. So the one thing I think that I would say to the regulators listening in is learning from other states that may have been, encountered this, or other countries that have been through, can be useful, because the other countries or states may have encountered a particular issue, and I think they can learn a lot from each other.
Thank you, Mitchell. Well, I think the regulatory side is going to be a definite challenge. It's good to hear that there's other jurisdictions outside of Canada that have regulatory issues as well, and now we're a brotherhood, it looks like, and a sisterhood. Excuse me, Leslie. I know we're focused on North America on this panel, so I'm curious to see what your views and where you think it's going in the next decade, and I would put that question out in terms of the material to the food industry, but where do you think it's going into other industries? you want to start on there, Markos?
That's a great question. And what Mitch said earlier is, there are so many rabbit holes you can go down in seaweed production and what you can do because it is such a flexible and versatile thing. It is a real challenge to pick a path. Who do you want to be and where do you want to sell your product? We're focused on the food side, whether both pet and human, because that's what I'm familiar with. But I think there are other opportunities out there. Most of our product we've been able to sell in one way or another into really either food or ingredients in other value-added foods, premium pet food, and we've sold some product into a fertilizer sector as well for commercial and home use fertilizer products. We are also doing our own, tipping our toes into a retail product line, and I think every potential operator has got to consider what they want to do. I think that the marketplace is particularly receptive to seaweed related products, but we have to go build that. I think market and market development and informing the public about why they would want to use this as opposed to something else is really one of the primary hurdles for the industry as a whole.
I couldn't agree more. It's a hurdle for sure, but it's an opportunity for those in the market now. And, those get funded and make it happen are going to make a difference, and be able to get that kind of market share. Mike, what about you? You and I talked about this a long time ago, and you've seen the industry. You've seen a lot of different players come into the industry. What are you seeing in terms of demand?
So let's look at what you start with. It's a climate positive, ocean regenerative crop, and you're producing something. So first of all, there's no negatives or very few negatives with what you're producing. After that, the sky's the limit. Some folks choose plant-based food for human or pet. Some folks choose nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals. There's bioplastics. It depends on whether you want to be a high volume, low margin producer or a low volume, high margin producer, or somewhere in between. The demand will increase. We've had queries from Asia, and you go, oh my goodness, Asia accounts for over 90% of the seaweed. They're tapped out. There's no more space to grow, and it doesn't make sense to ship, products laden with water across the Pacific. So the opportunity will continue to grow in North America. Look at protein sources for plant-based food, pea protein, whey, soy. They're starting to cap out at how much they can make. Folks haven't even turned to the ocean yet. So we're very bullish on the opportunities for getting seaweed into mainstream ingredients across the sectors that I just spoke.
For sure. Yeah, and we've seen here in Canada, we're seeing a ton, especially out in Alberta, a lot of pea-based protein groups popping up all around. But as far as competitive advantage is concerned, seaweed has it. It just simply does. So Leslie, you're in California. That's where everybody's plant-based out there, right? So there must be a burgeoning market these days for seaweed.
I'm on your team. I'm also a food lover. So yeah, I think the demand has always been pretty overwhelming since we started, at least with smaller scale, more artisanal things in the food market, like Mike was suggesting. The commodity scale stuff, that demand is building, but it's something that we've adamantly stayed away from, and really our main interest is on those higher value things. But in California, yeah, you can't, kelp and seaweed for nutritional value is just extremely high because everyone here is perpetually on a health kick, and there's no shortage of information on the newest micronutrient, or we've heard about it throughout this whole conference, this whole festival thing, about the many myriad benefits, and people in California are hyper aware of that. So the demand in consumer packaged goods is great. is very high. And then also we work with local chefs, and we know that chefs really set America's, and I'm sure Canada's palate, right? Chefs are really integral in determining what seafood we want to eat at home. And they have huge impact there. Just look at salmon and tuna. You know, we can thank chefs for as we make at the grocery store. So we work with chefs to convince them, hey, use seaweed on your plate. It's not just for garnish. It's there to add nutritional, tons of flavor, etc. So we are trying to build the California consumer up in that way, in putting it into seafood restaurants as well as in packaged goods. So,
okay, Mitchell, your perspective?
Yeah, I think on the value added, especially related to food, education seems to be the key. We're kind of trailblazing into new markets, a lot of consumer education. But I think one thing to keep in mind is in the bulk market, what we're really competing with to some degree is the wild market, as well as areas of the world, like in parts of Asia, that can produce a lot cheaper than we can at the moment. So like in our area, ASCO, rockweed is huge, and the amount you can harvest at the price you can't be competitive with farm seaweed or even close to it at this point in the market. And same goes for a lot of the Asian seaweed. So some of the very large buyers, one, there's going to have to be probably a sustainability premium that they're going to start having to pay, but also it's going to be economies of scale, getting farming to a level where you're really going to start bringing down the cost per kilo of seaweed, which is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time, but I think that's when the market is going to start shifting, right, where it becomes more competitive. People, you know, I know Pierre and others, you know, if you can produce organic in seaweed and clean water at scale, and you can be price competitive, there's big markets for this, and that exists now.
For sure. You know, if you can grow that organic product at scale at a low price, you know, I think that there's going to be, you know, through conference, we've heard from, you know, anything from bioplastics to anything, there's going to be a massive amount of requirement for this type of product. So that's interesting. So I also wanted to ask about, now I'm not the expert in operationally, but operationally, how do you reduce the risk of pollution or contamination in your seaweed farm, and how does that, obviously that's going to affect your scalability as well? Do you want to start there, Markos?
Yeah, sure. I think that that's a great question. You know, and I think two really important parts is technology, but site selection is going to be where, you know, where that really makes a difference. You know, in whether it be Maine or British Columbia or Alaska, we avoid pollution by putting farms where there aren't people that will pollute, that could potentially pollute that area. You know, and I think that is the most that's the easiest way to avoid those types of heavy metal contaminants, is by being in places where you won't see them.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
For the first step, we're operating in a jurisdiction that has tanker bans and no dumping of holds and things like that. So the first step is to be in a jurisdiction that recognizes you've got to protect the ocean. And the second step we've taken is geographical dispersity. One of our farms is about 60 kilometers south of Markos. It's in British Columbia, but it's only 60 kilometers south of Alaska. Drop down almost 500 or 800 kilometers south, and there's another farm. So for us, we're in vastly different parts of the ocean. So if there's a localized event in one space, we have contingencies to get seaweed from the other space. So for us, it's those two things: sparsely populated coast, a jurisdiction that respects the ocean and has regulations, and then geographical dispersion with it.
Right, of course. And Leslie, hardly a sparsely coast, but you know, part of what you're doing is you're it help clean the oceans. So that's a different perspective as well. So what's your view on this?
So, I mean, testing, we are hugely densely populated state, and everyone wants to live on the coast, right? So we don't have many waterways that are devoid of human activity, and we do have a pretty extensive coastal pollution. But what we're trying to do as a company, and what others are starting to do, is to just kind of go for the pollution if it's something that can be remedied by seaweed farming. And of course, that's a super long-term investment, but it's, in California, we can't avoid the pollution in most bays and estuaries. We're setting up a farm in Humboldt later this year, which is one of the most pristine bays that you can find in the state. But, San Francisco Bay, San Diego, the pollution is it's just there from legacy polluters who have not done their job to remediate the waterway. So we are just kind of going for it and seeing how we can quantify those services on a per unit basis of X contaminant. And we know that seaweed physiologically is really great at absorbing heavy metals, and so why not integrate that into our business model? And yeah, that's what we've done.
Thank you again. And Mitchell, what about in Maine?
The geography of Maine is pretty good from a industrial output perspective. It's fairly remote from large industries, so there's very few parts of Maine where we have any contamination issues. Maybe certain parts of very southern Maine, but we look at it very similar to how our organic certifier looks at the issues. It's the distance from wastewater treatment facilities, boat discharges, areas like that is where we think setting up farms makes the most sense. And because we also work not only on our own farms but with third-party farmers, a lot of the third-party farmers are in fairly remote areas, some of them extremely remote areas of Maine.
Thank you for that. One of the things I'd like to go back to is, and I think it's something we all contemplate as part of I'm getting some feedback. Is that me alone? I don't know. Anyway, one of the things that we're all contemplating is the CO2 equation. Do you think that the CO2 offsetting and reduction, how big do you think that'll play in your businesses? And where do you see this aspect of seaweed growing in the future? Markos?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's lots of discussion about carbon uptake and things like that. One, I think we still need more research into it, and two, I haven't seen a program out there yet that is available for us. I mean, certainly we would like to explore that, but there really isn't a current opportunity to do that. And I think that's going to be derivative of research, understanding exactly what it means, defining what sequestration is, and lots of different considerations in that. But I think the potential is huge. We're just not quite as evolved in that arena as I think we need to be.
Okay. And Michael, what have you been seeing in terms of, I mean, there's all kinds of algorithms needed and stuff. What are you seeing in this space?
So definitely science. We're part of Oceans 2050 to help quantify carbon sequestration. Seaweed sequesters carbon. Question is, for how long? Is it a day when it's consumed and putting into other uses, or is it thousands of years because it's stored into the deep ocean? On net, it does do it. It provides positive outcomes. The question is, as Markos said, the science and more quantification. And again, an agreed upon international standard. There's no use one country saying you get this and another country saying you get that. It won't have any credibility. We need to have a defined national standard.
Yeah, of course.
Warren, the minister joined us. Maybe, you can introduce her for the closing remark. And I think that we'll conclude, the 16 hours seaweed around the clock.
You know what I think? I think Pierre wants to go to bed. Okay,
Not
I will
yet.
do that. And thank you. You know, before I do, thank you, everyone. This has been very educational, and it's great to have all of your time and your input. So yeah, I'd like to, for the closing remarks, I'd like to introduce the Honorable Lena Popham. Is it Lena or Lana?
It's Lana.
Lana, I apologize, Lana. The
Yeah,
Honorable Lana Popham, Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources and Agriculture for the Province of British Columbia, Canada. Welcome, Lana.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I know it's good afternoon here anyway. It's really great to join you virtually from the Saanich Peninsula, or the territories of the Wasanic peoples here in British Columbia. I'd like to bring greetings from Premier John Horgan. He would love to be here. I'm sure he loves to be out on the ocean, but it's the last day of our legislative session here. I'm so excited to be a part of Seaweed Around the Clock. A huge congratulations to everyone who has organized this and taken part, especially to BioMarine for hosting this global digital event. I think your day started out in French Polynesia about 15 hours ago, and now we are so excited that you've decided to end your day here with us in British Columbia. This is a really great place for opportunities for your businesses and the next generation of seaweed producers and processors. A few weeks ago, I was invited to speak at the first ever British Columbia Seaweed Festival. And it was a great opportunity there to thank our local businesses who are putting BC seaweed on the world stage. And now just a few weeks later, we're in front of a global audience. So we can't tell you how much we appreciate that. British Columbia's seafood sector is very diverse. We have about 100 species of commercial fish, shellfish, and marine plants to choose from in our oceans and in our freshwaters as well here on the west coast of Canada. In 2019, the total sales of primary seafood production in BC was just over $1 billion. And around the globe, we know that consumers are looking for seafood products, ocean products that come out of our oceans here because they like the taste, they know it's safe, they know it's traceable, and it's sustainable. We've always been known, of course, for our delicious salmon, our oysters, and our spot prawns. And now we're starting to see an increase in interest in our marine plants and in our seaweed. The BC government is proud to support the growth of the marine plant industry in our province so businesses can expand and operate in a sustainable way. And we're very excited to support these businesses to do that. We all understand the enormous contribution that fish, seafood, and marine plants make to our economy and to our culture here. In 2019, we processed almost 490 tons of wild and farmed marine algae and plants, and that includes seaweed. This represents over $3.4 million in wholesale value for us. This rapidly growing industry is bringing new opportunities for our coastal communities and First Nations, as well as providing environmental benefits like carbon sequestration, which I know you were just talking about. And this brings opportunities, of course, for business relationships and partnerships and investments worldwide. And I'm sure many of you might be surprised to learn that here on our coast, we're home to more than 600 species of marine plants. I know you've also been learning today as you stop in different places around the world that these versatile plants can be used in so many ways. In addition to being an amazing food, which we know about, our aquatic plants are being used, excuse me, in herbal remedies, cosmetics, and in pharmaceuticals. And we're also looking at companies and researchers who are developing plastic alternatives, which is we're very intrigued about as we look at legislation right now that's starting to limit single-use plastics. And in my role as Minister of Agriculture, we have a pilot project going on with some cattle operations to try and reduce emissions from our cows too by feeding them seaweed products. We absolutely recognize the potential for expansion, and we want to figure out how BC companies can contribute to the international production. We've been working closely with farms and harvesters and processors to help realize these potential benefits. I was raised on this coast, And like people living next to oceans worldwide, there's a shared love and admiration for our marine environment. We obviously appreciate it for its beauty and its role in our planet's health, but also for the food it's provided for thousands of years. Some people are just learning about it now, but we know that it's been around for a very long time. So as we see a global recovery from COVID-19, I invite all of you to come and join us in British Columbia. You can tour all of our communities on the coast, like Campbell River, Sechelt, Victoria, Prince Rupert. This is all home to our incredible BC seafood workers and seaweed workers. So thanks for inviting us as a province to join in your festivities. And please give BC Seaweed a thought when you're considering your businesses. As the pandemic winds down, I urge you to come take a look at our hardworking marine plant industry in action. We would love to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. And we let you go because we know that you're very busy. And I will pass, the flag back to Warren, because we were about to conclude. So feel free, to leave and go back, to your business. And thank you so much for participating to this first edition of Seaweed Around the Clock.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I wanna...
So Warren, I give you back, the floor. So the concluding, remarks, maybe we can wrap up. And it was a very, very good panel, very interesting. And even me, I learned a lot, from you guys. And that's why, we need more synergies and more teaming up, from the global seaweed industry.
Yeah, Pierre, thank you. Thank you for putting this whole thing together. It's extraordinary. And I didn't know you had that kind of strength to stay up for 24 hours. That's impressive. So this industry to me is like I said, as a 25-year venture capitalist, I see nothing but opportunity. And as a vegan, of course, I'm super interested in this space. But I'm a pragmatist as well. There's certain challenges that we need to overcome, and one of the key messages is that this industry is up and coming, and we need to stick together and help each other, educate the market and educate the regulators and the various governments, as well as the users of different food products, plastic products. This is an enormous challenge. But sounds like everybody on this panel is up for it. So thanks for having me, Pierre. I really appreciate it too, as well. So
that will conclude, the last session. I look forward to organizing next year the global Seaweed Around the Clock, where women will be more preponderant, and also we need, to make sure that we have enough to say to demonstrate that we did some very huge progress in between. So thank you so much. And Warren, tomorrow afternoon, we're going to spend a lot of time together again for developing the seaweed industry. So I look forward to this and enjoy your afternoon. I don't know where I am. Yeah, it's evening here. And talk to you soon. And I'd like, to catch up with every single, participant to debrief and to explain what will be the next challenges, on our industry. Thank you so much. Thanks, Markos. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Leslie.
So much.
Mitchell.
pleasure to meet all of you.
Thank you, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.